In a cold Cheyenne jail cell in 1902, a man sat writing furiously. Tom Horn, once a scout, detective, and alleged hired gun, knew his days were numbered. The gallows waited outside, but before he died, he had one last job to do. He was going to tell the world his story, and he was going to make it legendary. The problem was, Tom Horn had never let the truth get in the way of a good story before. Why start now? Horn opened his autobiography with a tale of a tortured childhood. He described his father as a strict religious fanatic, a follower of the disciples of Christ who ruled the household with an iron fist. According to Tom, the discipline became so unbearable that at just 14 years old, he fled into the wilderness, severing ties with his family forever. A young boy against the world, the classic outlaw origin story. Except it wasn't true. Tom had been in his late teens when he left home, not 14, and he didn't sever ties with anyone. In the late 1870s, he and his older brother Charles ran their father's livery stable together in Burton, Kansas. They worked side by side, feeding horses and repairing wagons like any other business partners. Later, when Tom became a Pinkerton detective in Denver, his sister Maud moved in with him as his housekeeper. The tortured runaway narrative made for better reading than Guy who left home at a normal age and stayed close with his siblings. So that's what Tom wrote. When Horn turned to describing his adventures in the Apache Wars, the exaggerations grew even bolder. He claimed the legendary scout Al Sieber hired him in 1876, immediately recognizing young Tom's natural talent for tracking. According to his version, he became a scout right away, rising quickly through the ranks to become one of the Army's most trusted Apache hunters. The Army's own records told a different story. Tom Horn didn't even arrive in Arizona Territory until 1881. When he showed up at Whipple Barracks near Prescott, the quartermaster hired him as a teamster. He drove wagons. He hauled supplies. Eventually, he worked his way into the pack train service, managing mules that carried equipment across rough terrain. It was honest work, but it wasn't glamorous. It took until 1885 before the Army gave Horn a chance at scouting, and he didn't become Chief of Scouts until the fall of that year. He held the position for exactly 12 months before the Apache campaigns wound down in October 1886. But in his autobiography, those few years expanded into a legendary career spanning a decade. Time has a funny way of stretching when you're the one holding the pen. Horn's linguistic abilities grew with each page he wrote. He insisted he spoke fluent Apache, mastering the complex language so thoroughly that he became the Army's official interpreter. He painted himself as the bridge between two cultures, the white man who could think and speak like an Apache. The reality was far less impressive. Horn struggled with basic Apache phrases. The Army never trusted him to interpret formal negotiations because his skills simply weren't good enough. What Tom actually learned was Border Spanish, the hybrid language common in the Southwest. That's what he interpreted when the Army needed him, but fluent in Border Spanish doesn't have quite the same ring to it as master of the Apache tongue. Building on this foundation of linguistic fiction, Horn constructed his most audacious claim yet. He wrote that Geronimo himself, the most famous Apache war leader of them all, insisted that only Tom Horn could serve as his personal interpreter. According to Tom, he and Geronimo shared a special bond, a mutual respect that transcended the conflict between their peoples. The truth was more mundane. During the final pursuit of Geronimo in the summer of 1886, Horn was present as one of several chiefs of scouts. He was there, he participated, but he never interpreted for Geronimo, and he certainly played no role in the formal surrender negotiations in September. What Horn actually did was escort Geronimo and other Apache prisoners to the train station at Bowie. He made sure they got on the train that would take them into exile in Florida. It was an important job, but it wasn't the intimate partnership he described in his book. When Horn left Arizona and joined the Pinkerton National Detective Agency in 1890, he probably thought his days of exaggeration were behind him. Surely, a professional detective career would provide enough real accomplishments to build a reputation on. It didn't quite work out that way. His first major success came in 1891 when he helped catch the gang that robbed a train in Cotopaxi, Colorado. The case earned him genuine praise from his superiors. Tom Horn, detective hero. But then came Oregon. The Pinkerton Agency sent Horn to investigate a train robbery near Salem. He failed to locate the criminals. Then, in a twist that must have embarrassed his employers tremendously, Horn himself got arrested for robbing a casino in Reno, Nevada. The detective had become the suspect. It took 2 separate trials, and the personal intervention of his boss, William Pinkerton himself, to secure an acquittal. Even after he was cleared, the citizens of Reno remained convinced of Horn's guilt. His detective career never quite recovered its luster. By 1892, Horn had left the Pinkertons and drifted into darker work. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association hired him, and later individual cattle barons brought him on as what they politely called a range detective. His actual job was eliminating people accused of stealing livestock. By 1895, whispers followed Horn wherever he went. People said he was a killer for hire, an assassin, someone who would shoot a man for the right price. Horn may have killed as many as 4 men during this period. The exact number remains unknown because he was never convicted in a court of law for any of these deaths. But his reputation grew regardless, and, as reputations do, it expanded well beyond reality. Someone started claiming Horn had killed 17 men in Colorado alone. The number had no basis in fact, but it sounded impressive. It made him sound dangerous. Horn never bothered to correct it. Despite his growing reputation as a man-killer, Horn's contemporaries never considered him a gunfighter. This confused people later when they tried to figure out why Tom Horn never achieved the legendary status of a Wyatt Earp or Billy the Kid. The answer was simple. Horn wasn't quick on the draw. Despite standing 6'2" and weighing up to 200 pounds, he was reportedly ineffective in fistfights and avoided using knives. His method, such as it was, involved shooting people from ambush, from hiding. When war with Spain erupted in April 1898, Horn saw an opportunity for redemption. General Nelson Miles, commanding general of the U.S. Army, personally sought him out to run civilian pack trains. In Cuba, with the 5th Corps, Horn supervised 8 separate pack trains. The weather was miserable. Enemy guerrillas harassed his men constantly. Chronic illnesses swept through the packers. But Horn persevered. He did his job well and earned genuine applause for his competence. Finally, a real accomplishment. Finally, something he could point to without embellishment. Naturally, when Horn tried to parlay this success into a position as packmaster in the Philippines, the War Department rejected him. Even his victories came with asterisks. The end came for Tom Horn on a ranch in Wyoming. Someone shot and killed 14-year-old Willie Nickel in July 1901. Suspicion fell on Horn. Deputy U.S. Marshal Joe LaForce brought him in for questioning and emerged with what he claimed was a full confession. Horn's supporters insisted the confession was obtained through trickery, that LaForce had manipulated the conversation and twisted Horn's words. The debate raged then and continues today. Was the confession real or manufactured? It didn't matter. The confession, authentic or fabricated, sealed Tom Horn's fate. On November 20th, 1903, he climbed the steps to the gallows in Cheyenne. Legend says he braided the rope that hanged him, though this too was probably just another myth attached to a man who spent his life creating them. As Horn waited in his cell those final months, writing his autobiography and reshaping his life into legend, he must have known what he was doing. He was choosing how history would remember him. The wagon driver became a legendary scout. The mediocre detective became a criminal mastermind. The ambush shooter became a feared gunman. The man who knew a bit of border Spanish became fluent in Apache. Tom Horn's greatest skill wasn't tracking Apaches or solving crimes or even killing for money. His greatest skill was self-promotion. He understood something fundamental about human nature. People prefer legends to truth. They want their outlaws larger than life, their frontiersmen impossibly skilled, their villains terrifyingly competent. So Tom gave them what they wanted. He wrote himself into history not as he was, but as he wished to be remembered. And in a way, it worked. Over a century after his execution, people still debate Tom Horn, still try to separate the man from the myth, still wonder which stories were true. Maybe that was his plan all along. If you can't be a real legend, write yourself into one. Lock yourself in a jail cell with pen and paper and simply decide what the truth will be. Tom Horn gambled that future generations would remember the story he told rather than the life he lived. Looking at how his name endures today, it seems he won that final bet.